My name is Alexandra Reeves. I'm 32 years old and I've served in the United States Army for over a decade. I chose a military career following in the footsteps of my grandfather, Colonel James Reeves, a decorated veteran who fought in conflicts that shaped our nation. This is the story of how an ordinary day at Dallas International Airport turned into the moment that forever changed my perception of his legacy and my own duty. I grew up listening to my grandfather's stories of discipline, honor, and the duty to protect our country. He was a man of few words, that when he spoke, everyone listened. His posture, always erect, even at 85, and his penetrating gaze reflected decades of service to his country. As I rose through the military ranks, he watched with a mixture of pride and concern, pride that I was following in his footsteps, concern that he knew exactly what that meant. That Thursday afternoon, we were at Dallas International Airport. I had a week's leave and had arranged to spend the time with my grandfather at his home in Texas. He insisted on picking me up himself, even though he was old and had health problems that were beginning to show. A Reeves never fails to complete a he repeated whenever I suggested I take a taxi. The airport was exceptionally crowded that day. A storm had delayed several flights, and hundreds of frustrated passengers crowded the terminal. My flight had landed nearly 2 hours late, and I could already picture my grandfather impatient, checking his antique wristwatch every 5 minutes in the arrivals hall. When I finally made it through the arrivals gate, I noticed something strange. A group of airport students were running toward one of the nearby gates. Instinctively, I adjusted my posture and sharpened my senses. Years of military training don't fade even during leave. My grandfather was there, as expected, with his signature green beret and the impeccable posture that set him apart from the crowd. But instead of the hug I expected, he looked at me with concern and nodded toward the unusual movement of security agents. "Something's wrong," he said in that deep voice he used during operations. It wasn't a question, it was an observation. Before I could respond, an announcement blared over the airport public address system, asking everyone to remain calm and remain where they were. A technical situation was being resolved at gate B17. "Let's go," my grandfather said, already moving toward the commotion, completely ignoring the announcement. "Grandpa, wait," I called, following him. "They asked us to stay where we are." He turned to me with a wry smile I knew well. Since when does a Reeves follow civilian orders when there's danger? I didn't have time to argue. I quickly caught up with my grandfather, who, despite his age, moved with surprising agility through the crowd. As we approached gate B17, the situation became clearer. A considerable crowd was trapped on the boarding bridge, which appeared to have suffered some sort of mechanical failure. Screams of panic began to spread, and the airport staff clearly didn't know how to handle the situation. "Damn civilians," my grandfather muttered. "No training, no protocol." When we reached the start of the bridge, a security guard tried to stop us. "Sir, madame, please return to the terminal. We have a technical issue here." My grandfather completely ignored him and tried to pass. The agent, a young man, older than 25, blocked his path. "Sir, I can't let—" "Listen here, young man," my grandfather interrupted with that commanding voice that made even generals sit up straight. "I'm Colonel James Reed, retired Special Forces, and this is Captain Alexandra Reed, 82nd Airborne Division. What you have here is not a technical situation. It's an emergency with the potential for mass panic. Now, if you'll excuse me." The young agent hesitated, looking from my grandfather to me. I took the opportunity and showed him my military ID. "We can help," I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. "We're trained in crowd control and emergency situations." At that moment, another agent approached, this one older and wearing insignia indicating a higher rank. After a quick explanation and checking our identification, he nodded. "The boarding bridge has locked down while the plane is still connected. We have about 70 passengers trapped inside, and the air conditioning system on the bridge has stopped working. Some passengers are panicking, and we fear the situation worsen." My grandfather naturally assumed the commanding "Do you have a megaphone radios?" The supervisor signaled to a nearby employee, who quickly brought over a megaphone and 2 radios. My grandfather took one radio and handed me the other. "I'm going to the front of the bridge to assess the situation," he said. "Alexandra, you stay here and organize an orderly line. When we begin evacuating, Passengers will need a controlled flow. I nodded, already beginning to organize the space with the help of the security. Meanwhile, my grandfather advanced through the initial part of the boarding bridge, which was still accessible. Over the radio, I could hear him talking to the plane's pilot, who confirmed that all the aircraft systems were functioning normally, including the air conditioning. "We're going to connect the aircraft's air system to the bridge," I heard my grandfather instruct over the radio. "The airport engineers have already been called, but it will take time. We need to stabilize the situation in the meantime." In less than 5 minutes, my grandfather had established a clear chain of command. Flight attendants were calming passengers inside the plane while airport staff worked to resolve the mechanical issue. I was organizing the reception area, preparing for when we began evacuating people. Everything seemed under control when suddenly we heard screams coming from the jetway. Over the radio, the tense voice of a flight attendant reported, "We have a passenger collapsed. Possible heart attack." My heart raced. The situation had just become much more serious. Over the radio, I heard my grandfather asking for information about the passenger and giving clear instructions to the flight attendants on first aid procedures. "Alexandra," he called over the radio, "we need a medical team here immediately and an evacuation route for this passenger." "I'm already taking care of it," I replied, signaling to the airport who immediately called the on-call medical team. As we waited for the medical team, the situation on the bridge worsened. The air was growing hotter and more muggy, and panic was beginning to set in. Over the radio, I could hear the flight attendants trying to remain calm, but their voices were already showing signs of strain. Finally, the medical team arrived, and I quickly briefed them on the situation. But there was a new problem: how to get them to the collapsed passenger with the bridge locked. That's when my grandfather returned to the foot of the bridge, his face showing signs of concern. "The engineers say it will take at least an hour to repair the bridge mechanism. We don't have that time. The passenger is stable for now, but we need to get him out, and the heat is affecting other passengers as well." He turned to the newly arrived engineers. "Is there any way to manually open the bridge's emergency doors?" One of the engineers, a middle-aged man with a badge indicating he was the team leader, nodded. "Yes, but it would compromise the structural integrity of the bridge. It's not recommended." My grandfather fixed him with that look I knew well, the look of a man who had made difficult decisions in far worse circumstances. "We're talking about lives at risk here," he said. "How long does it take to prepare the manual opening? 15 minutes? Maybe less," the engineer replied, clearly uncomfortable with the idea. My grandfather turned to the airport supervisor. "Who makes the final decision here?" The supervisor seemed to be struggling internally. Technically, he'd be the director of operations, but he's in a meeting outside the airport. "I have authority in emergency situations, but this is an emergency," my grandfather interrupted. "We have a passenger in critical condition and others at risk due to the heat and panic. Every minute." The supervisor looked at me, as if seeking a second opinion. I maintained my firm stand. "My grandfather is right," she said. "I'm trained in risk assessment in crisis situations. The risk of waiting outweighs the risk of opening manually." After a few seconds that felt like an eternity, the supervisor nodded. "Do that, but we'll need to evacuate all passengers at once, and in a controlled manner." That's when I began to realize the true magnitude of the challenge we face. Evacuating more than 70 people, some possibly panicked, one passenger in critical condition, all through a manual opening not designed for this type of operation. My grandfather, however, seemed more alive than I had seen him in years. He was in his element, commanding, organizing, making quick decisions under pressure. He quickly established a detailed plan. The medical team would enter first to stabilize and remove the critically ill passenger, followed by small groups of passengers, prioritizing the elderly, children, and those with special needs. As the engineers worked on the manual opening, my grandfather approached me. "Alexandra, you will lead the evacuation from inside. I trust you to maintain order and ensure everyone gets out safely." I felt the weight of responsibility, but also the pride of having his trust. "Yes, sir. And Alexandra," he added, his voice softening a little, "remember what I always say. In a crisis, people don't just need direction, they need confidence. Show them you know what you're doing, even when you're not sure." With these words, he handed me the megaphone and stood next to the supervisor, ready to coordinate the operation from the outside. The next 15 minutes were a frenzy of activity. Engineers worked on the manual opening, the medical team prepared, and I organized the available security officers and staff into a makeshift evacuation team. Finally, the chief engineer announced that the opening was ready. It was a side opening in the bridge, not very large, but large enough for one person to pass through at a time. I picked up the radio. "Grandpa, we're ready to go in." "Understood," he replied. "Keep the channel open. I'll be monitoring." With the medical team right behind me, I entered the boarding bridge. The heat was oppressive, and the air was thick and stale. The bridge, normally a space for quick passage, now felt like an endless tunnel. Along it, passengers sitting on the floor or leaning against the walls looked at me with a mixture of relief and apprehension. I used the megaphone to introduce myself. "Good afternoon. I'm Captain Alexandra Reeves of the United States Army. We're here to help you get out safely. Please remain calm and follow our instructions." The mention of my military rank seemed to have an immediate effect. Some passengers straightened up, others nodded in acknowledgement. There was something about the presence of a military man in uniform that inspired confidence in situations like this. I continued, "We have a doctor here to treat the passenger who became ill. We will then begin evacuating you all in small groups. Please help each other and follow our team's guidance." I guided the medical team to the critically ill passenger, a man in his 60s, who was being cared for by 2 flight attendants. The doctors quickly took over, checking his vital signs and preparing him for transport. "He's stable, but we need to get him out of here as soon as possible," one of the doctors said. "We suspect a mild heart attack aggravated by the heat and stress." I nodded and began organizing the first groups for evacuation, following my grandfather's plan. Children with their parents, elderly people, and a pregnant woman formed the first group. I radioed my grandfather that we were ready to begin the evacuation. "Understood," he replied. "We have an area prepared to receive you. Begin whenever you are ready." That's when I realized something was wrong. As I turned to lead the first group to the opening, I noticed a man in a suit moving quickly among the passengers, his demeanor clearly agitated. His eyes were wide, and he muttered to himself as he repeatedly checked his watch. Years of training had taught me to recognize the signs of someone about to collapse emotionally, or worse, someone who could pose a threat. I discreetly signaled to one of the security officers accompanying me and approached the man. "Sir," I said, keeping my voice calm but firm, "we are beginning the evacuation. Please join." The next group, he looked at me, and for a moment I saw pure terror in his eyes. "I can't miss this flight. I can't. You don't understand. I have to get to Chicago today. Sir, I understand your concern, but right now our priority is to ensure everyone's safety. The flight will certainly be rescheduled as soon as the situation is resolved." He shook his head violently. "No, you don't understand. This isn't an appointment that can be rescheduled. It's my daughter's life that's at stake." That took me by surprise. "Your daughter? She's at Northwestern Memorial Hospital waiting for a bone marrow transplant. I'm the matching donor. The surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning." His voice trailed off. "If I'm not there, ... double quotes." At that moment, I understood the gravity of this man's situation. It wasn't just anxiety or frustration over a delayed flight. It was literally a matter of life or death. I picked up my radio. "Grandpa, we have a special situation here. A passenger who needs to get to Chicago today for a critical medical procedure. A bone marrow transplant for his daughter." There was a brief silence before my grandfather replied, "Understood. I'll see what we can do. In the meantime, continue with the evacuation as planned." I turned my attention to the man. "Sir, we are aware of your situation and will do our best to assist you. For now, I need you to remain calm and cooperate with the evacuation process. I promise you won't be forgotten." Something in my tone or my words seemed to reach him. His shoulders relaxed slightly, and he nodded. "Thank you." With that temporarily resolved, I turned my attention to the evacuation. The first group was being led to the opening, where staff members were helping them safely through. The critically ill passenger was evacuated on a makeshift stretcher, with medical staff working quickly to keep him stable during transport. The operation was progressing well, but time seemed to drag. The heat on the bridge remained intense, and I could see signs of dehydration in several passengers. Using the radio, I requested that water be made available on the other side for the evacuation. As I led the third group to the opening, my radio crackled. "Alexandra, this is Grandpa. I have an update on our special case." "Go ahead," I replied, stepping back a little for privacy. I spoke with the airport operations director, who just arrived. He contacted the airlines. "There's a private flight leaving for Chicago in an hour. The passenger can board it." I felt a wave of relief. "Understood. I'll let you know." I turned back to the man in the suit, who was now waiting patiently with the fourth group. "Sir, I have good news. As soon as you're evacuated, you'll be put on a private flight to Chicago, leaving in an hour." Her eyes filled with tears. How did you manage this?" "Let's just say we have some connections," I replied with a small smile. "The important thing is that you'll be with your daughter tomorrow." He grabbed my hands. "I don't know how to thank you." "There's no need," he said, feeling a lump in his throat. "It's our duty." The evacuation continued methodically. Group after group, passengers were led safely off the bridge. Despite the heat and discomfort, there was no panic. People collaborated, helping one another, demonstrating the solidarity that only emerges in times of crisis. Finally, after nearly an hour, the last passenger was evacuated. I made a final check of the bridge, making sure no one had been left behind, before exiting through the opening myself. On the other side, the scene was one of organized efficiency. Passengers were being attended to by medical teams, given water, and given next steps. The man in the suit had already been escorted to his special flight, after thanking me once again with tears in his eyes. My grandfather was talking to the airport operations director when I approached. Upon seeing me, he stopped talking and walked toward me. "Good work, Captain," he said formally, but his eyes shone with pride. "Thank you, Colonel," I replied, equally formally, but with a smile I couldn't contain. The operations director approached us. "I can't thank you both enough. The situation could have deteriorated quickly without your intervention." My grandfather waved off the thanks. "We just did what anyone with proper training would do. What matters is that everyone is safe," the director insisted. "Even so, the airport would like to express its gratitude. If there is anything we can do for you, ... Double quotes. My grandfather looked at me, then back at the principal. "Actually, there is something. My granddaughter is on leave for a week. It would be nice if we could get home without any more delays." The director smiled. "Consider it settled. We have a VIP transportation service at your disposal." With the formalities completed and thanks exchanged, my grandfather and I were finally able to step away from the commotion. As we walked to the shuttle, he put his arm around my shoulders, a rare gesture for such a reserved man. "You know, Alexandra, when you decided to pursue a military career, I had conflicting feelings," he began. "On the one hand, I was proud to see you following in my footsteps. On the other, I feared what it would mean for you, the sacrifices, the dangers, the invisible scars that war leaves on us all." I was surprised by his openness. My grandfather rarely talked about his feelings or worries, but today he continued. "I saw that you didn't just follow in my footsteps, you improved upon them. You have the fortitude and decisiveness a soldier needs, but also the compassion and empathy that, frankly, took me much longer to develop. I learned from the best," he said, feeling an emotion he hadn't expected. He shook his head. "No, you already had it inside you. The training just shaped what was already there." We walked in silence for a moment, each of us absorbing the words exchanged. Finally, spoke again, his voice lighter now. "When I heard about your flight delay, I was furious. You know how I hate delays and changes of plans." I laughed, relieved by the change in tone. "Yes, I know. You always say that punctuality is the courtesy of kings and the obligation of soldiers." "Exactly," he smiled. "But now I see that sometimes delays happen for a reason. If your flight had arrived on time, we wouldn't be here when that bridge got stuck, and that man might not have made it to Chicago in time for his daughter's transplant," I added. My grandfather nodded, his gaze distant, as if he were seeing beyond beyond that moment. Throughout my military career, I was trained to believe that the success of a mission depended on following the plan to the letter. But life has taught me that sometimes it's in moments of chaos and improvisation that we make the most significant. We arrived at the vehicle waiting for us, a sleek black SUV with a driver. As we settled into the back seats, my grandfather looked at me with an expression that mixed pride and something else, something like peace. Alexandra, when I saw you handling that situation today, calm, competent, compassionate, I realized something important. Oh, home? That I can actually retire now, he laughed, and for the first, his laugh lacked the reserve I'd always associated with him. It was a full, genuine laugh. The world is in good hands with people like you. As the vehicle left the airport toward my grandfather's house, I reflected on his words. All my military life, I had sought his approval, trying to live up to the standards he had set. Today, I finally felt like I had not only met those standards, but found my own path within them. The rest of the week with my grandfather was unlike any other visit. There was a new dynamic between us, no longer just a mentor-mentee relationship, but one between two professionals who respected each other. He told me stories he'd never shared before, not just stories of battles and strategy, but of doubts, fears, and lessons learned. In return, I shared my own experience, my own doubts, and my reflections on the career path we had chosen. For the first time, I felt he saw me not just as his granddaughter or as a continuation of his legacy, but as a whole person, with my own journey and my own contribution to. The night before I left, as we sat on his porch, gazing up at the starry Texas sky, he handed me something, his green beret, the one I always saw him wear. "This is yours now," he said simply. I took the beret reverently, feeling the weight of everything it represented. "Grandpa, I can't accept this. It's yours," he interrupted gently. "It's always been yours, since the day you chose this path." I looked at the beret in my hand, feeling the texture of the fabric, the familiar scent I'd always associated with my grandfather. "Thank you," was all I could say. He nodded, understanding everything I couldn't put into words. We sat in silence for a long time, just enjoying each other's company under the vast Texas sky. The next day, when I said goodbye to him at the same airport where our adventure had begun, there was a new understanding between us. We didn't need many words, a hug, a look, and I knew that, regardless of where my military career took me next, I carried with me not only my grandfather's legacy, but the confidence that I could honor it in my own way. During the flight back to base, I reflected on everything that had happened. The incident on the jetway could have been just that, an incident, an anecdote to share with colleagues, but it became something much more meaningful, a moment of clarity, a deeper understanding of what it means to serve, protect, and lead. I thought of the man in the suit, imagining him reunited with his daughter in the hospital, preparing for the procedure that could save her life. I thought of the passengers we had evacuated, each with their own story, their own fears and hopes. I thought of the airport staff, the security agents, the engineers, all working together in a situation they were unprepared for, but facing it with courage and determination. And I thought of my grandfather, how he, even at 85, had naturally taken command, confident in his ability to make a difference. "Stand down," he had told the security guard who tried to stop him. Simple words that, in another context, might have seemed arrogant or unnecessary. But in that moment, they were precisely what the situation demanded: decisiveness, authority, action. "Stand down." The words echoed in my mind as the plane streaked across the American sky. My grandfather had spent his entire life refusing to back down when he saw something wrong, when he realized his intervention could make a difference. And now, I understood that this was the true legacy he had left me, not just the green beret that rested in my bag, but the courage to step forward when others backed away, to take responsibility when others hesitated. 6 months after that day at the airport, I received an unexpected letter. The envelope had a Chicago postmark and a sender I didn't immediately recognize. Inside was a photograph and a short handwritten note. The photograph showed a man, the same man in the suit I had helped at the airport, next to a young woman in a hospital bed. They were both smiling, and despite the young woman's pallor and the obvious signs of medical treatment, there was an unmistakable aura of hope in her eyes. The note simply said, "Captain Reeves, Lily was released from the hospital yesterday. The doctors say the transplant was a complete success. I can't express our gratitude enough. Because of you and your grandfather, I was able to be there for my daughter when she needed it most. You not only made sure I got to surgery on time, you gave us hope when we needed it most. Lily would love to meet you someday, if that's possible. With eternal gratitude, Michael." Donovan, there was a phone number below the signature. Sitting at my desk at the military base, I stared at the photograph for a long time, absorbing the impact of that simple image. It was a tangible reminder that beyond missions, strategies, and orders, our work was ultimately about people, about protecting life, creating connection, and sometimes being the turning point that alters the course of a story. I picked up my phone and dialed the number Michael had left. After a few rings, a male voice answered. Michael Donovan speaking. Mr. Donovan, this is Alexandra Reeves. I just received your letter. There was a moment of silence, followed by an exclamation of surprise and joy. Captain Reeves! I didn't expect you to call so quickly. It's such a pleasure to speak with you again. It's my pleasure, Mr. Donovan. I was very happy to hear that Lily is recovering well. Thank God, yes. The doctors say she's responding better than expected. She's even started making plans to return to school next semester. We talked for a few minutes about Lily's recovery, how she had faced treatment with a courage that impressed even the most experienced doctors. Michael told me that she was 19 years old and studying music at Northwestern University when she was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia. She never lost hope, he said, his voice choked with emotion. Even in the worst moments, when treatment seemed to be failing and a transplant was our last option, she kept smiling, making plans for the future. She seems like an extraordinary young woman, I commented, genuinely touched by the story. She is, and I'd really like to thank you personally. In fact, double quotes, he hesitated for a moment. We're planning a small celebration for her birthday next month. It would be a great honor if you could attend. I know it's a bold request, considering your military obligations and the distance, I thought for a moment. My schedule was packed, with intensive training and a possible mission on the horizon. But something inside me, perhaps that same voice that made me recognize Michael's desperation at the airport, told me this was an important opportunity. I'll check my schedule and do my best to be there, I finally replied. Can you email me the details? After we exchanged contact information and said goodbye to Michael, I sat for a long time, contemplating the photograph again. I remembered something my grandfather used to say. The true test of a soldier is not how many enemies he defeats, but how many lives he saves. That night, I called my grandfather. When he answered, his voice was stronger and clearer than I had heard it in years. Alexandra, I was just thinking about you. Was it? Any special reason? He chuckled softly. I just watched a news report about that incident at the airport. Apparently, someone filmed the evacuation on a cell phone, and the footage ended up going viral. We're famous, my dear. I was surprised. Really? I haven't seen anything about that. Probably because you're always too busy training or planning missions to pay attention to social media. Anyway, the report focused mainly on the human aspect of the story. They interviewed some of the passengers we helped, including an elderly woman who said you practically carried her off the bridge in your arms. I smiled at the memory. The lady in question had mobility issues and was clearly panicking. Carrying someone wasn't exactly standard protocol, but at that moment, it seemed like the only right thing to do. Grandpa, I got a letter today, I said, changing the subject, from the man who needed to get to Chicago for his daughter's transplant. Do you remember him? Of course I remember. How are they? I told her about the letter, the photograph, and the invitation to Lily's birthday party. As I spoke, I could feel a rising emotion in my voice, something I would normally try to control, especially in conversations with my grandfather. But since our time together after the airport incident, something had changed between us. There was a new level of openness, of shared vulnerability. Are you going? He asked when I finished counting. I'm seriously considering it. I'd have to adjust a few things in my schedule, but yes, I think I will. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. When my grandfather spoke again, his voice had that rare quality, soft, thoughtful, almost vulnerable. You know, Alexandra, I spent much of my life keeping my distance from the people I helped. It was easier this way. You do your job, accomplish your mission, and move on. No complications, no emotional involvement. I understand that, I replied, and I really did. Detachment was a form of emotional protection that many soldiers developed over time. But now, looking back, he continued, I realize I missed so many valuable opportunities, lives I touched and never knew how they went, stories that began with my intervention, but whose outcomes I never witnessed. He paused meaningfully. Go to the party, Alexandra. Meet Lily. Complete this circle. Thank you, Grandpa, I replied, touched by his. I think I will. And one more thing, he added, his voice returning to the firmer tone I was used to. If you go, I want you to take this with you. What is this? My beret. The one I gave you. Lily must know it was a Reeves operation that saved her father. I laughed, feeling a mixture of emotion and amusement. My grandfather might have changed in many ways, but his military pride remained unshaken. Yes, sir, I replied, playing with formality. The Reeves beret will be present. A month later, after securing a 3-day leave, not without considerable effort, and a few favors called in, I found myself on a flight to Chicago. My grandfather's green beret was carefully packed in my suitcase, along with a small gift I'd chosen for Lily, a silver bracelet with a wing-shaped pendant, a symbol of her regained freedom from her health. The celebration was to be held at the Donovan home in a quiet suburb north of Chicago. As the taxi pulled up in front of a 2-story house with a well-tended garden, I felt a sudden surge of nervousness. It was strange-eyed faced combat situations, led troops in extreme conditions, made life-or-death decisions under intense pressure. But in that moment, standing in front of that door, I felt as anxious as a recruit on his first day of training. I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. The door opened almost immediately, revealing Michael Donovan. He looked different from the desperate man I'd met at the airport. More rested, more relaxed, his eyes shining with a quiet joy. "Captain Reeves," he exclaimed, smiling broadly. "You really came. Please come in." "Alexandra," I corrected gently, as he led me inside. "Today I'm here as Alexandra." He nodded in understanding. "Alexandra, you're very welcome. Lily is in the back room with some friends and family. She doesn't know you're coming. We wanted it to be a surprise." The house was simply decorated, yet welcoming. Family photographs covered the walls, telling the story of a family united through years. In several of them, I saw a young woman at different stages of life, from a smiling baby to a teenager, with a high school diploma in hand. Lily. When we reached the back room, a small group of people were chatting animatedly. In the center, sitting on a sofa with a blanket draped over her knees, was the young woman in the photograph. Her hair, which had likely fallen out during treatment, was beginning to grow back short but thick. Her skin still had that pallor characteristic of someone who's undergone aggressive treatments, but her eyes, intensely blue, radiated life. She was the first to notice our arrival. Her gaze, first curious, then incredulous, fell on me. "Daddy?" she called, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is that her? Is that Captain Reeves?" Michael nodded, visibly moved. "Yes, dear. She came especially for your birthday." A respectful silence fell over the room as all eyes turned to me. I felt the weight of that attention, but this time, it wasn't the kind I was used to. It wasn't respect for rank or authority, but something deeper, more personal. Lily tried to get up, but seemed to falter slightly. I quickly approached, saving her the effort. "Please don't get up," I said, kneeling beside the sofa so we were level. "I'm Alexandra Reeves. It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Lily." Her eyes filled with tears. "The pleasure is all mine, Captain. Or may I call you Alexandra?" I smiled. "Alexandra, it's great. And happy birthday." She took my hands in hers, thin, fragile, but surprisingly firm. "You saved my father's life, and, by extension, mine. How can I thank you enough for that?" "It wasn't just me," I replied, feeling a lump in my throat. "It was a team. And my grandfather, Colonel Reeves, was the one who really made it happen." I opened my bag and pulled out my green beret. "He wanted you to know this was a Reeves operation." Lily took the beret reverently, examining it carefully before looking back at me. "Your grandfather must be an incredible man." "He is," I confirmed, "and I'd be very happy to know that you're recovering well." The next few hours passed in a flurry of conversation, laughter, and shared story. Lily introduced me to her friends and family, each with their own expression of gratitude. I met her mother, Sarah, a woman of serene presence who gave me a long, wordless hug, the kind of hug that says more than any words could ever convey. During dinner, sitting between Lily and Michael, I found myself sharing stories I rarely told, Not the typical, sanitized, and generalized military anecdote, but real experience, moments of doubt, fear, and growth. There was something about the atmosphere of that house, the simplicity and sincerity of those people, that invited openness. Lily, in turn, told me about her battle with leukemia, the ups and downs, the moments of despair, and the small victories that kept her hope alive. She spoke of her passion for music, especially the cello, and how she dreamed of playing again once she was fully recovered. The doctor said I can start practicing again next month if my strength continues to improve, she said, her eyes shining with anticipation. I'm a little rusty, but music... It's like breathing to me. I missed it more than anything else during treatment. I'm sure you'll regain your skill quickly, I commented. The discipline and perseverance you've shown during your treatment are the same qualities needed to master an instrument. She smiled thoughtfully. You know, during the worst times, I used to picture melodies in my head, pieces I'd already played, pieces I wanted to learn. It was my way of staying connected to the life I wanted back. She paused, her fingers drumming softly on the table, as if playing invisible keys. Actually, I started composing something during my recovery, a piece inspired by this whole journey. That's amazing, I replied, genuinely impressed. I'd love to hear it someday when you're ready to share. Actually, she exchanged a knowing look with her father. I'd like to play a little for you today. It's not the whole piece. I'm still working on it, and I don't have the stamina to play for very long. But I'd like you to hear the beginning. Before I could answer, Michael was already on his feet. I'll get the cello. Minutes later, the room was reorganized. Lily sat in a chair in the center, her cello poised between her legs, while everyone formed a semicircle around her. Her hands seemed to gain new life as they gripped the bow, a strength not evident in her everyday movements. I called this piece Bridges, she explained, adjusting the position of the instrument, for obvious reasons, and then she began to play. The first notes were hesitant, like uncertain steps on unfamiliar ground. Gradually, the melody took shape, transforming into something more structured, more confident. There was a dialogue between low and high note tension and resolution, darkness and light. As I watched her fingers dance over the strings, I thought about how this young woman had transformed her near-death experience into art, how she had channeled her suffering, her fear, her hope, into something that could touch others. It wasn't so different from what we did as soldiers, I realized. We, too, transformed our experiences, sometimes traumatic, sometimes inspiring, into something that could serve others. The difference was that we rarely shared this process of transformation with the world. We kept our stories bottled up, our emotions bottled up, our fears private. When Lily finished playing, there was a moment of reverent silence before the room erupted in applause. Her eyes met mine, and I saw an unspoken question in them. What did you think? I stood up and approached her, unable to contain my emotion. It was beautiful, Lily. Truly beautiful. You captured... everything. The fear, the waiting, the hope. I hesitated for a moment before adding, my grandfather always says the best stories are told by those who almost lost them. You just proved him right. She smiled, tears shining in her eyes. Thank you for being part of my story, Alexandra, for making sure it continued. That night, as I returned to the hotel, I reflected on the significance of that day. I had gone hoping to bring joy to a young woman in recovery, to close a chapter in a story I had helped write. But, as often happened when one opened one's heart to genuine connection, I had received far more than I gave. Lily had shown me a different way of transforming difficult experiences into something meaningful, something that could touch others. Her music was a testament not only to her personal journey, but to how our paths intertwined in ways we rarely fully understood. The next day, before catching my flight back, I stopped by the Donovan house again to say goodbye. I found Lily alone on the front porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the quiet. Good morning, I greeted, walking up the steps to join her. She turned with a smile. Alexandra, I thought you had already left. My flight isn't until the afternoon. I wanted to say a proper goodbye. She gestured to the empty chair next to her. Join me. Mom and Dad went out to get some groceries. The first time in months they've left. Me home alone, a small step toward independence. I sat, enjoying the gentle morning breeze. How are you feeling today? Tired, she admitted. But it's a good kind of tired. Like after a successful concert, we were silent for a moment, just watching the occasional movement on the street. A mailman delivering mail, a mother pushing a stroller, a dog walking with its owner. Alexandra, Lily said finally, her voice more solemn. Can I ask you a personal question? Of course. How do you deal with that, knowing that your actions, your decisions, can literally change the course of someone's life? The question caught me off guard. It was something I'd pondered many times myself, especially after the airport incident and throughout my military career. It's complicated, I replied honestly. Most of the time, we act based on training, instinct, what feels right in the moment. We rarely take the time to fully consider the long-term impact of our decisions. I paused, gathering my thoughts, but I think what helps me cope is remembering that while we can influence the course of events, the people we help also have their own role in the story. I looked at her, at the strength visible in her eyes, despite her physical fragility. Like you, your father arrived in time for the transplant because we intervened at the airport. Yes, but you're alive today because you fought, because you didn't give up, because you turned your suffering into art. This has nothing to do with me or my grandfather. It's all you. She considered my words for a moment. I see what you mean, but still, without that first intervention, without that bridge, double quotes, her voice cracked slightly. I like to think we all build bridges for others, in some way, sometimes without even realizing it. That's a beautiful way of looking at things, I agree. And maybe that's why your song touched me so much yesterday, because you captured that truth. She smiled, a smile that lit up her entire face despite her persistent pallor. When the piece is complete, I'll send you a recording. And your grandfather, if he wants to hear it, he'll love it, I assured him. In fact, he'll be furious if he doesn't get a copy. We laughed together, and in that small shared moment, I felt a connection that transcended our differences in experience, age, and circumstance. Two women whose paths crossed by chance, or perhaps by something more than chance, sharing a fragment of their journeys. As I stood to leave, Lily took my hand. Thank you for coming, Alexandra. It meant more than you know. The honor was mine, I replied, squeezing his hand gently. And when you perform again, on a real stage, with your completed piece, I would love to be in the audience. It's a promise, she said, her eyes shining. And a Reeves never breaks a promise, right? I smiled, recognizing the words my grandfather often used. Right, a Reeves never breaks a promise. On the flight back to base, as clouds drifted past the plane window, I thought of all the people whose lives had been intertwined in this unlikely story. My grandfather with his uncompromising determination, Michael with his desperate love for his daughter, Lily with her unwavering resilience, the airport staff, the passengers, the medical team, each playing their part, each building their part of the bridge. I remembered my grandfather's words at the airport when the security guard tried to stop him. Stand down. In a military context, it meant to retreat, to give up. But my grandfather, with his decades of wisdom, had understood that sometimes the true heroes are those who refuse to back down, who press forward when others hesitate. When we landed, I called him as soon as possible. How was it? He asked without preamble. It was transformative, I replied, knowing he would understand the weight of that word. Lily is amazing, Grandpa. She's writing a song about the whole experience. She's calling it Bridges. Bridges, huh? Laughed softly. Appropriate. She'll send you a recording when it's ready. And she wants you to hear it too. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. When my grandfather spoke again, his voice had that rare quality I had begun to recognize, a vulnerability he rarely allowed others to see. You know, Alexandra, when you decided to join the army, I had my fears. Not because I doubted your ability, but because I knew what this life required. The sacrifices, the difficult choices, the invisible scars that leave on the soul. I know, Grandpa, I replied softly, but now I see you found something it took me decades to discover, the true purpose behind the uniform. It's not just about following orders, accomplishing missions, or even protecting the country. It's about people, the lives we touch, the bridges we build. I felt tears in my eyes, something rare for me. I learned from the best, I managed to say. He laughed again, but this time there was a note of emotion in his voice. No, my dear, you learned and then refined. You turned lessons into wisdom of your own. That's how it should be. We talked for a few more minutes before saying goodbye. As I walked back to my quarters at the base, I carried with me not only the memories of those transformative days, but also a new clarity about my purpose, my path. For me, a military career had always been a way to honor my grandfather's legacy, to follow in his footsteps. But now, I understood it was much more than that. It was about building bridges between past and present, between duty and compassion, between strangers whose fates intertwined at crucial moments. At the airport, on that chaotic day, my grandfather had said stand down to someone who was trying to stop him from helping. And with that, he had taught me one of the most important lessons, that sometimes the greatest act of courage is refusing to back down when we see the opportunity to make a difference. As I opened the door to my dorm, I thought of the melody Lily had played, the notes that began hesitantly and gradually gained strength and clarity. It was like our own journey, certain at first, but gaining purpose and meaning as we progressed, note by note, step by step, bridge by bridge. And in the end, it wasn't just about saving lives, but about connecting them, about recognizing that, in a world often divided by walls and borders, our true strength comes from our ability to build bridges, even when, or perhaps, especially when paths seem blocked and passages impossible. Because that's what I learned from my grandfather, from Lily, from that whole experience, that we should never stand down when we have the chance to build a bridge for someone. We should never retreat when we can advance, never give up when we can persist, never be silent when our voice can make a difference. This is how we honor our uniform, our oath, our legacy, not only by following orders, but also, and perhaps most importantly, by knowing when it's time to step forward, even when everyone around us tells us to back down. Stand down, my grandfather had said at that airport. And with this apparent contradiction, a military command used to defy an order, he taught me the most valuable lesson of all, that true courage lies in knowing when to advance, when to build a bridge, when to be the support others need to get through their most difficult moments. And that's what I carry with me now, with every mission, every challenge, every new dawn. The certainty that, like a Reeves, I will never back down when there's a bridge to be built, a life to be saved, a difference to be made. Because in the end, it's these bridges that truly matter. It's these connections that define not just our careers, but our lives. And that's why I will continue to serve, to protect, to lead, not just because it's my duty, but because it's my purpose, my bridge to the world and to the future I want to help build. End.